Welcome to the final video for debate strategy. This is the final theoretical video we're going to have, and it's going to be covering rebuttal. So I hope you've all had a great time. Congratulations to those who made it through from trials, and to those who didn't, remember we still have 2 months to go, and if you continue working diligently, we do hope that you will be brought onto the squad as well. So this is going to be a very all-inclusive video. It's going to be a full-on comprehensive discussion on rebuttal, and everything should be left on the floor after this. Feel free to message us if you have any questions. So here's what we're going to be covering. We're going to take you straight from the basics. We're going to do a brief introduction. We're going to talk about what a response is and what the structure of it is. We're going to talk a bit about offensive and defensive rebuttal. Then from there, I'm going to take you through a comprehensive list of what strategic flaws are and which ones you can and should identify. Then we're going to go through a few types of responses or techniques you can use to respond to arguments. Then we're going to go into advanced rebuttal, where we're going to, and this is not going to be structured in the same way it is, particularly for part 3. We're going to talk about responding to context. We're going to talk about characterization and framing. We're going to talk about how to progress debates via the rebuttal and how you should prioritize your rebuttal. Further to that, we're also going to talk about the issue-based rebuttal structure, identifying the issues in the debate, and then a couple of tips, which would be how to have your style, and then layering responses and having consistency in your issues. Point number 9 and 10, I won't go into too much detail over because it's already been thoroughly covered in the speaker roles video. All that I'm going to do is simply just briefly hash over it for the sake of completeness when we're talking about rebuttal. First thing I want to do before I start any of these discussions is to give a full acknowledgement of all of the pieces of literature that went into creating this presentation and this PowerPoint ultimately. So I used POA's debate strategy guide, which was, for many of you who may not know, one of the first ever guides for debate theory in South Africa. I think it's really cool. And then I used Ansuya and Bettina's rebuttal and progression PowerPoint for the 2018 essay training. Also people who are massive influences in my ability to even debate. Then I used Bettina and Irene's rebuttal guide for the 2017 essay trials. So a lot of the content you're getting is an amalgamation of generations and years of knowledge with respect to how to debate, all packaged into one PowerPoint slide. For a lot of it, it's also just lifted directly from those guides because I don't think I have the capacity to phrase it any better than they have in their own words. So should you want to check out those things, please let me know. I'm also going to leave the resources on the Google Classroom. All right, now let's get into the basics. Another thing in this entire video is based, or it's themed as diss tracks, because in my brain that's the ultimate response, which is why Hit 'em Up was the first slide, and I think Kill Shot is like the basic of diss tracks. But let's get into it. Okay, so rebuttal is one of the most important aspects of the debate. It is what basically distinguishes a debate from a speech contest. And by definition, it's just you offering a response to what is being said by the other team. Let's look at the structure of a response. And this is a really simple and logical structure that we can follow. Excuse me. So we use the ICE framework to structure our rebuttal, which is identify, critique, and evaluate. Funny thing about this is, even at this level, a lot of speakers are stopping at the critique point, and they're not evaluating the value of the criticism that they've given. So it's important that we go back to these basics, we understand them, and we make sure that all of our responses are structured using the ICE framework. Let's look at what each one means. So to identify means that you are referencing and you are stating the idea that you are responding to. The important thing here to do is to represent the idea honestly and not misrepresent it to make yourself and your case look good. Because realistically, your adjudicators have already heard the idea from the other speakers and they don't have an incentive to be biased to what you think the idea is or what you say the idea is. So if you are genuine to the idea, it is often more that you'll be given more credit as opposed to when you straw man. And later on, we're going to get into a conversation about what straw manning is and how to approach being straw manned in the debate. And then critiquing is the bulk of your response. It's the ICE framework. This is where you do the work of showing why something is either flawed or untrue. I always say to distinguish rebuttal from a counter consideration is understanding that a response aims to do one of two things. Firstly, it is either to prove that something is not true. Secondly, or the other alternative, it is to undermine the value of something. So in your critique, ask yourself if you are doing those things. It's also important to provide examples to also substantiate your responses. Then we get to the E, which is evaluate. This is what we keep talking about when we say you're not impacting your responses, you're not impacting your argumentation. This is where you say, fine, after the criticism I've given, what damage did it do to their case, or what value should you assign to the critique that I've just given? Here you're answering one of two questions, both if you want. Firstly, it's showing how your response has damaged their case and ability to win the debate. It's also doing a comparative between your team and the other team at that particular point in time to show why your response has put you ahead in the race. Let's look at an example here of how we use the ICE framework to create a response. So the death penalty is going to be a recurring example that I'm going to use throughout the video because I want to keep it as simple as possible because some of the concepts we might be getting into might be a bit more complex. So proposition said implementing the death penalty would decrease the crime rate because people fear death. Therefore, the policy would deter them from committing crimes. Cool. That's the idea as they said it. The critique then becomes, people are also scared of jail, but they continue to commit crimes. This is because people don't assume they'll get caught when they commit crimes, hence the specter of punishment doesn't faze them. Particularly in South Africa, where we have a murder conviction rate of 6.8%, people know that if they make a half-decent attempt of covering up a crime, they are unlikely to be convicted, let alone charged. Cool, I've given that response. Now let's evaluate the value of that response. This means that number one, proposition's model of decreasing crime is ineffective, hence they have no pragmatic reason to implement the death penalty, therefore they ought lose this debate. Secondly, comparatively, at our worst, the crime rate on our side is the same as proposition. However, we are better because at least we don't waste more state resources on a futile policy that will cost citizens more so that we can hypocritically do the same thing we are punishing people for, which is killing, right? Cool. That is a clear and simple example of how to use the ICE framework to structure your responses. All right, then quickly glossing over the offensive and defensive rebuttal, because I also think it's something that's incredibly self-explanatory. Defensive rebuttal is rebuttal that you use or that is for the purpose of defending your own case. So essentially you are responding to the responses that have been already given to your case by the other team. Offensive rebuttal refers to giving those responses to the other team's case. So offensive, again, you are attacking the other team. Defensive, you are defending your case in that regard. So both types of rebuttal are important for you to do in a debate, but the type of rebuttal you should prioritize often depends on, number one, what issues are you losing? Secondly, the side of the debate that you are on. For example, I would say as a rule of thumb in proposition, you should prioritize defensive rebuttal because in proposition we are looking for, do you have a succinct and coherent case? Do you have a proposition that we can value? In opposition, I would say you should prioritize offensive rebuttal because in that situation, we are looking at, are you able to comfortably critique the case that proposition is giving you to the extent that we can no longer value it in the debate? So as a rule of thumb, in a good, equally matched debate, that would be the priority. Of course, this is dependent on a wide variety of other factors you need to consider. something like, what issues are you losing in the debate? Things like, what are the important issues of the debate? All of these things can shift the type of rebuttal that you prioritize. Cool. All right, now we're going to get into the second part, which is types of rebuttal. This image here is the takeover, which very few people who are uncultured, think was a better distract than either. So let's get to it. Right, this has been a conversation we have been having at training for the longest time ever, where people always want to talk about strategic flaws in a debate, right? But your strategic flaws are just you giving responses that are just normal responses you can give in a debate. They're not necessarily strategic flaws. A strategic flaw is an issue with the team's case in its entirety. If they have an issue with the entirety of the case, then it is a strategic flaw. Right, that's one thing I want you to understand. If it is an individual argument that you believe is a problem, then you put that within your issues. If it's debating rules like they didn't take enough POIs, whatever, you just don't say that. You're not the judge. It's not your job to say those things. So, if you are saying you are identifying strategic flaws, I want to see the words in the screen. I'm going to explain each of them in detail, but the 7 points you see here are the only strategic flaws you will come across in debates. If it's not these 7 things, believe me, it belongs in your issues. Don't mention it as in your strategic flaws. Right. Oh, also the images here of Ice Cube's No Vaseline. I think it's a really good diss track towards NWA, and then Drake's Summer 16, which wasn't very. It's a listenable diss track. It's against Meek Mill. I think it was just like unnecessary at this point, but yeah, sure. Let's talk about the problem-solution gap. So the problem-solution gap occurs when a team proposes a solution that doesn't match up well with the problem that they've outlined. So this usually occurs in 3 scenarios. First one is when teams have presented an overly broad problem. Second one is when teams have presented a very real and important problem but offered a soft model solution. Or the third option is when teams analyze the problem well, but they don't show how their solution necessarily addresses the problem. Ergo, problem solution gap. There's a gap between their problem analysis and their solution analysis. In the case where this happens, it's important to point out this kind of flaw and show why it's fundamentally damaging to their case. Again, this comes down to impacting, and it's one thing that I'm always going to emphasize. Whatever you tell me, show me why it's important for the debate and show me the damage it creates for the other team's case. Same thing with the problem-solution gap. I think an easy and logical example of it would be if in the death penalty debate, and again, I keep using the same example because I want to keep it simple, people identify, for example, the crime rate and they speak about how awful it is. Then they immediately go to, the death penalty is going to reduce the crime rate. Cool, but you didn't tell me how your problems are going to be solved by the solution. You are just saying that they are going to be solved by the solution. So that lack of analysis in between means that there is a gap between the problem they've identified and the solution that they're providing. All right, then there is context debate mismatch. This refers to when a team is arguing in the absolute wrong context of the debate. So, first things first, before I even explain the rest of it, I need you guys to understand that context is a debate in and of itself. Irrespective of the side you are on, you should always be looking to attack the other team's context by showing why it's not the valuable one, or you should be looking to defend your own context to show why it's the context where the debate happens. Debates are won and lost on context because at the end of the day, everything and anything you say in a debate probably could be true. But where it's important is when you show me that the place where it is true is the most important one, and it is the one that you have. Super vague, but what do I mean? Death penalty. There are states where the implementation in the death penalty has correlated to a decrease in the crime rate. There are states where the exact opposite has happened. When you give me the argument that implementing the death penalty will lead to a decrease in crime rate. That's cool, and it's probably true for some cases and untrue in other cases. Where the debate is won is where you are able to tell me that this is true, or that the debate is happening in the cases where your argument is true. That's where context comes in. So make sure that you are arguing for the right context. But in the case where there's a debate context mismatch, the team is arguing in the absolute wrong context in a debate. So in the case where this happens, it's important to point it out and to bring it back to the context that's useful for you. So the example here is that in a debate about legalizing prostitution, if proposition team argues that the most prostitutes in the world are living in moderately okay conditions and choose to be prostitutes because it's the job they prefer, it's your job as opposition to point out that this context is in a very small minority of cases. Prostitution is most prevalent in extremely poor countries with massive unemployment rates and where women are extremely limited in their options. So the debate will become where each team is able to prove that their context is valid. Then contradictions. We know what this word means, so I'm just going to explain it in the context of the debate. So in order for a contradiction to be true in the context of a debate, it has to be impossible for two arguments to be true at the same time. Don't call any and every argument a contradiction, right? Because if it really is a contradiction, it can massively damage the other team's case. But if it's not a contradiction, you're just going to look like a fool for bringing it up. So it's important to show why it's a contradiction, firstly, and then secondly, it's important to show how much it damages the other team's case to the point of it deciding who wins and loses. Then line consistency. This is a problem that at least I've encountered adjudicating the debates across the province. What the first speaker sets out as the line is very different from the second or the third, or at some point in time there's a change. That is what a line inconsistency is. If that inconsistency is identified, it's important that you show the problems that arise from that inconsistency and why it's damaging to their case. So an example here is that if a team starts off defending why they would only legalize all drugs at the end of the debate, they are choosing to only defend marijuana, then clearly there's been a shift in the team line. Then you can argue, hey, the fact that they're shifting the team line means that they don't necessarily believe in their principle. Here's why there's damage in that shift in team line. Cool. And then there is strategic misprioritization. So this refers to when a team might not be dealing with the major points of a debate, so you need to decide what the burden of the opposing team is and what yours are, basically. And if the arguments that they are providing are not within the scope of that burden, then it's important to point that out. So, for example, in a debate about regretting the Rainbow Nation narrative, if opposition is focused on doing away with the narrative, if opposition focuses on how if we do away with the narrative, people will start racially hate criming each other and tensions will be worse than ever before, this is clearly missing the point of the debate. Because the debate is intended to reflect on the past, what has already happened, and not the future impacts of removing a narrative like this in society. So again, point this kind of flaw out, show why it damages their chances of winning the debate. Cool. And then there's mutual exclusivity. So sometimes the ideas that your proposition has, or the idea that your opposing team has, don't necessarily conflict with yours, right? So they're not mutually exclusive with yours. Your ideas can exist and their ideas can exist, so they're not necessarily bringing anything new to the table. There's an example on the screen, I believe. Maybe it's the same one, I'm not sure. But at debates that I did in 2017, I did a Proposition 1 speech about how education is very valuable for minorities and we should institute policies to make sure that minorities are educated. Opposition 1's speech was about how education isn't the problem, we should focus on getting minorities jobs. That's really, what we need to do. And I remember I think, yes, Matt was my proposition too, and he pointed out something important. He said, these two things are not mutually exclusive. You can, in fact, not only can you, but we'd suggest that you do. You can definitely look for jobs while also simultaneously educating people. So, again, pointed out, show why it damages their case. But important thing, again, to note here, right, when you are identifying this, it is that you don't make the mistake as well if you are in opposition. So if you are in opposition, don't suggest that. You must make it clear why your idea cannot coexist as the ideas that are in proposition. Cool. And then there's a hung case, which simply put is when the arguments in the case are reliant on each other in order to have value and exist, right? So it is to say they are not standing independently in the case, but they depend on each other very heavily. Quick thing, don't do this. Don't ever do it. I don't support it. You are setting yourself up for failure if you do it. So there's an example here about random drug testing and the benefits that would come, like a better learning environment and all of these things. All of these arguments are hung on the idea, all of the benefits are hung on the idea that drug testing in schools will actually be effective. So make sure that this isn't a mistake that you're making. Okay, now we're getting to the responses you can give for arguments. And here I have Pusha T's Exodus 23:1. I don't like it because it disses Lil Wayne and that's the GOAT. And then Remy Ma's Sheetha, which is a diss track towards Nicki Minaj. Very, very warranted. Buried Nicki Minaj. So shout out to Remy. But yeah, here are 12 types of responses that you can give to arguments. Now, I don't ever want to hear, I don't have a response, because I'm giving you a comprehensive list. If you are struggling to find a response to an argument, I would suggest using this as a checklist and checking if you are potentially like responding, or if you can use any one of these to create more responses to an argument. Right. So the first one are falsehoods, which is like cap, right? This is when the homies just straight up lie. Like homies just say things that are just untrue for absolutely no reason. So what you need to do here is to clarify what the truth is, right? And there's an example here, very simple one. If you hear crying children in the background, it's because I run a torturing ring. I always explain this to people. Yeah, so the example here is the reason we should not invade Syria is because Syria is the host of the Africa Cup of Nations. I'm going to ignore why. I'm going to ignore a lot of things there and just focus on the statement itself. So this is wrong, right? Because contrary to many people's geographical skills, Syria is not in Africa and it's not hosting the Africa Cup of Nations. So there's not much proof to show why the argument is true, so it's simply a lie. Then the second one is integrated rebuttal, basically. So integrated rebuttal refers to using an argument that you already have in the debate to show, or using it as a response to something that the other team has already said. I'm not going to dwell too much on this because I think you guys already do this relatively well. So make sure to point that out. Once you've delivered the portion of the argument that's responsive, point out that it's responding to this particular idea from the other team. That's how you should do your integrated rebuttal. Then we're looking at progressive rebuttal, which is, in my words, or the way I understand it, I like to think of it as the ether of rebuttals, because it's progressive rebuttal breaks down an idea based on how it was formulated. So in order to be able to do this kind of rebuttal, you need to have a good understanding of argument construction, so that when you are listening to the argument of the other team, you know what the premise is, you know what the links or analysis are, you know what the conclusion is, you know what their assertion, or you have to know the meta structure of an argument to be able to do this kind of rebuttal, because what you do is you break it down step by step. You say the premise of the argument is X. It's wrong because of reasons X, Y, and Z. Now let's look at the analysis of the argument. It's wrong for reasons X, Y, and Z. Therefore, the conclusion is also wrong for reasons X, Y, and Z. So it's breaking apart an idea and responding to the miniature parts of it. So that is, in my opinion, the most effective rebuttal you can possibly have. I am not all the way there at doing it as well. I try every now and again, but yeah. So another kind of rebuttal. Then there are false dichotomies. So in a false dichotomy, this refers to when a team mischaracterizes a problem, or they mischaracterize the outcomes in a debate. So they say that X will only lead to A and B, or that if someone makes a choice, will only have A and B outcomes. So when this occurs, like, just know it's a lie. The world has infinite possibilities, right, for literally any and everything. So if you are being presented with two possibilities, make it explicitly clear that there are actually a wide plethora of possible scenarios that are going to happen. Therefore, the team is imposing a false dichotomy. Cool. Then there are assertions. So this is one that you guys always love to point out. You say the other team didn't provide you with analysis as to why what they're saying is true, or why this, and that. But an assertion is simply put, just when a team doesn't provide analysis to substantiate the ideas they are giving. What you do in this case is, number one, you point out that there's an assertion. You point out that they are providing a statement that they have not substantiated. Then you give me the converse analysis. So you tell me why the statement is not true, or the links that they are trying to draw simply don't exist. Don't stop at they didn't tell us X, Y, and Z. Because if they didn't tell us and you are not telling us, then no one's telling anyone anything, and it's just a fundamental waste of everyone's time. So make sure that you are creating that level of explanation. Cool. Then the sixth one is casual causation. These words look so similar and they always confuse me for some reason or the other. So essentially, this is also referring to a lack of analysis. But the lack of analysis in question here is showing why like something will happen the way that people think it's going to happen, or that the reason why something is happening is because of what they've identified. So give an example of the death penalty here. Again, I love fighting with this death penalty example. So classic example here is when people argue that the introduction of the death penalty for murders causes a reduction in the number of murders. So apart from the fact that there have been instances where this has just been blatantly false, there has even been cases where there's been an increase in the number of murders, right, after the death penalty was implemented. But this particular response also looks at an example of Australia in 1996 and 1997, where the amount of murders was decreased due to stricter gun control, right? So that's another example of when people just have a flaw in their argument. You point that out and you show why what they're saying leads to something else may not actually be the case. I think the best example, or the best place to use this, is when you respond to examples where people say this particular outcome was reached because this similar policy was implemented, therefore it makes sense. So the way in which you respond to that kind of example is through the explanation that was given here. Cool. And then there's a straw man, which is something that I think you guys are aggressively familiar with for one reason or the other. So in the case of straw manning, it refers to when a team misrepresents the argument you've provided in an attempt to make it easier to refute. We've all seen it, so I didn't even bother attaching an example. When teams do this, a 4-step process that you need to follow. Firstly, point out that it is a misrepresentation of your argument. Secondly, explain what your argument was actually saying. Thirdly, show why they haven't responded to the root of your argument. And then fourthly, show how that lack of response is damaging to their case. Nice and simple, but it's a step process you need to follow in order to make strawman an effective response, as opposed to just saying, yeah, they've strawmanned our case. I don't care if you say someone strawmanned your case. You're not doing anything for me, you, or the state of the socioeconomic political situation. So don't do that. All right. Then even if rebuttal. This is where you suggest that even if what the other team is saying is true, it still doesn't have the same value that they are suggesting that it has, or that it doesn't reach the consequences that they think that it's going to reach. Even if rebuttal is important for every single response that you give. Every response that you give, I don't want it to just be one response and leaving it like that. I want you to add on the even if rebuttal to tell me why, even if what you've just said is wrong, here's why the argument isn't as valuable as they think it is. So I've attached an example here, then still speaking to the death penalty. And you can read it in your own time if you want, or read it, pause and read it on the screen, whatever you prefer. All right, then we look at the exaggeration and oversimplification. So sometimes teams can exaggerate the harms. This refers to a slippery slope. Sometimes they can also oversimplify things, right? Where they just say that a particular outcome is because of a particular thing. So you need to make sure that you outline that there's more nuance to it than what they are saying. So slippery slopes and golden staircases. A golden staircase is when there's an oversimplification or an exaggeration that suggests that one thing is going to lead to something amazing. So for example, if I give Nosipo my pen, she is going to be able to study. Because she's going to be able to study, she's going to write her final exams. When she writes her final exams, she's going to be first in South Africa. And when she becomes first in South Africa, she's going to study in Harvard. After studying in Harvard, she's going to be the president of South Africa. Therefore, my pen enabled her to be the president of South Africa. So, that just sounds a little bit way too incredibly like a lie. So it's very important that you point out those exaggerations and oversimplifications when they are happening. Cool. And again, there's an example here you can read and make use of. All right, then there's an evaluation of incentive structures. This one specifically refers to responding to efficacy matter or efficacy argumentation. What you do here is that you understand that there's very little certainty that everything will turn out how you want it to turn out or how you think it's going to turn out in a debate. So often when we are showing that a particular outcome will be reached, we are weighing up the incentives or the reasons why people do things. So all you need to do is show me why the reasons that the other team is providing, why a particular actor will act in a certain way, simply aren't true. Or they have other reasons and other motivations that may lead them to act in a completely different direction. So that's basically how you approach the evaluation of incentive structures. We're nearly done. Bear with me. This is again more expanding on the example that was previously given. So definitely do give this a read as well. Cool. Then there's reality simulation. That's Naz's Illmatic cover there. I think that's super cool. But yeah, this is where you take an argument and you play it out in reality. This is often the easiest way to respond to a lot of the arguments that I've heard you guys say. The idea that the government has an obligation to do something, therefore they will do it, is that such argument. Principally, it sounds good, but played out in reality, the government doesn't really do majority of the things that they have an obligation to do. And there's an example that I've tagged onto screen for you as well. So if you hear an argument that's theoretically sound, play it out in reality, right? Play it out in reality, and you'll find the flaws within that argument. So that's another thing that I want you guys to be actively doing. Cool. Then principal incongruency. The words that I chose for this are unnecessarily long and full of syllables. But this type of response is showing why a principle and the logical backbone behind an argument doesn't stand true in other elements of society, right? So this is why you show where this is how where you show sorry yo this is where you show where the logic of your argument or the logic of the argument that the other team is providing is still something that's often celebrated in other forms of logic or celebrated in other forms of society. So let's look at an example here. So the example is if the team speaks about death in the death penalty debate, they speak about how killing is something that's unnatural and it's basically playing God. So here's the thing, just because something is unnatural doesn't mean that it's horrible. Medicine is something that's unnatural, but we still don't think it's evil. Contraception literally goes against our biological construction, but we don't condemn it. And modern technology is also unnatural, but we still make use of it regularly, and the list goes on. So you take the logic behind the argument and you go, if we were to apply this logic any and everywhere else in society, is it something that is inherently harmful? So that is how you approach the concept of principal incongruency. Cool. Then now we are getting to the advanced stuff. This year was a valuable moment in hip hop after Ether, after Takeover, and the multiple diss tracks when they reunited on stage. That's Jay-Z and Nas for the first time. Nas signed to Def Jam Records shortly after. It was a pivotal moment. So yeah, let's get to the advanced stuff. Now let's talk about controlling the flow of a debate, right? So this refers to choosing what to give priority to. There are a couple of things we need to follow so that we control the flow of a debate well. Number one is, what is the issue that is going to win the debate? This is why I emphasize strategic prep time more than anything else. Because understanding what the valuable issues of the debate are is going to make it incredibly easy for you to prioritize what you can afford to win and what you can afford to lose, so that you make the right decisions in the debate itself. So you don't engage with every issue with equal priority. You choose the important issues, you attack them first, then the issues that are less valuable should come later, just in case you run out of time. Second thing is that you have to give priority to where the debate is also happening a lot, right? So sometimes the majority of the engagement doesn't always happen at the point that you view as most important to win the debate. And in that case, you show how they haven't really dealt with the best content, and you need to point that out. So do the work of strategically shifting the debate, but also sticking to engaging with what the other team is providing you with. And then here's a meta structure of how you can do that. But generally speaking, majority of the engagement in good debates, which is what I hope you guys will be in, will happen around the important aspects of the debate or around the core issues of the debate. All right, now we're speaking about where to progress your content, essentially. And in a central argument within a debate, you need to add layers and argumentative work throughout the debate. So the main thing you want to do is remain relevant. And we're going to discuss two main things here. We're going to discuss what to do if you think different things are important within the debate, and if teams agree on what's important, how reliant are you on the original argument? So, first thing, if different teams value different things in the debate, framing is something you need to actively contest. This is something that I always argue for. So everything in the debate is up for argument. There's nothing that you should take as true. So context, refute it, debate it, and argue with it. Secondly, framing of what is important and what is irrelevant also something you need to argue for. So make sure that you're doing that work within your rebuttal, your recontextualization, and all of those aspects. Cool. All right, then we're gonna talk about something important as well here, which is the margin by which the debaters won or lost creates obligations for you to progress the debate, right? And here I'm speaking about when you're going to nationals or when you're in those break rounds. The margins are very slim, so it's important that you do even those minor things, such as making sure that you are progressing your case in order to win the debate. So if your team is losing the debate, the larger margin by which you are losing, the more the argument needs to change. So this is where you need to place priority on the elements of your arguments that you are losing. Make sure that you are doing the work to respond, but also progress the arguments so that they become more nuanced and are able to stand against the other team's arguments. And if your team is winning the debate, the larger the margin by which you are winning shifts the obligation from progression to explicitly showing the damage done. So here, when you are winning the debate, the bigger focus is showing the strategic value of your ideas, more so than like progressing the ideas any further. So you still want to build the content, but you also want to prioritize on showing the damage to the other team's case. All right. So a couple new things that we need to discuss as well. So firstly, the idea of how to shut down a good argument or an argument that could be good but isn't yet. This is why I always suggest don't go, they haven't given us this analysis, because if you give me that response in O1, I still have 2 more speeches to give you the best argument on earth, even if my P1 didn't analyze it very well. So the way in which you can avoid that is take the argument at its best. Do the work of showing why the argument, when it is at its strongest, it's still something that can't stand. That's why I'm saying if it's lacking mechanisms, build the mechanisms up for them so you can respond to them. Therefore, even if they come up in speeches that come later, not only do you seem like the more charitable person, but you've done the work of responding to whatever can possibly come afterwards. That's something that I also heavily suggest. And then second to that is how to come up with new levels and content in order to progress an argument. Add more explanations, ask the why, what, and how questions to all your premises or each level of analysis that you have. And then add examples, add more depth, and then take the people who you care about or the benefits in the debate and see how you can apply it to a different actor, for example, right? Try to spin that benefit to show why a different group can also benefit from it. Show why you also assist the actor that they think is most important. So this is all work that can help you progress in a debate and be significantly more relevant. All right, and then now we're gonna get to the issue-based rebuttal structure, and we've gone over this all like a couple times already, particularly in the speaker rules video. So it's identifying the core conversation in that the debate aims to have. So that will be your issues, and then you provide responses to the other teams underneath those issues. You show the impact of your responses, and you conclude with a comparative. If, again, you're not too sure what all of these things mean, highly suggest looking at the speaker rules video. So how do you start identifying issues, right? So same conversation with the decision-making model. You only have 2 types of arguments, or what I think of it, there are only 2 reasons why we ever do anything in the world, right? It is either because it is the morally right thing to do, or because it produces positive consequences. Think about literally anything you do, it'll come down to one of those 2 things. So as a starting point, those can be the 2 issues that you construct. Then from there, you can potentially add different issues or reconstruct the idea of issues. But the most important issues in the debate will be those 2 things. Because remember, debating is a decision-making tool. It's derived from parliament, which is used to make decisions about the future of a particular territory. So That is an easy starting point for how to identify the important issues of the debate. And then you start grouping your arguments underneath those issues. Here I have same example I used even in the speaker roles video, possibly even in the year before. And then what is impacting? We've had the conversation, don't mind repeating the conversation. Hey, that's Nas's King's disease. So you show how your responses and arguments affect the debate. This can be done either through showing how your response damages the other team's case. I've done countless examples of how that could be done, or showing how your response further proves your burden. One of these two can be done. First thing in terms of tips, be very deliberate and conscious of your style within a debate, particularly if you're in a third speech or a responsive role, because the more a debate continues, the more as human beings the attention span slips. So in order to make sure you're compensating for that, if you see that a debate for the majority of the time has been a very monotone debate, make sure that you have a style that grabs the attention of the adjudicator. If everyone in the debate has been engaged in a screaming match, make sure that you speak with more calmness throughout your speech so as to differentiate yourself in the ears of the adjudicator. So make sure that you are very deliberate with your style in a responsive role because they are later on in the debate. Secondly, for each argument, layer your responses. So don't only have one response to an argument because it's super easy to respond to one response. But if you have multiple responses that are well explained, that's more difficult to respond to. So make sure that you are layering your responses. Then, in terms of issue-based rebuttal, the issues that your second speaker identifies should be the same as the issues your third speaker identifies, and the issues you use in your reply speech should be exactly the same. Because your issues denote how you see a debate as a team. That's what they denote. So ensure that there's consistency across the board. Where do you decide what the important issues of the debate are? That is done within your strategic silent prep. So make sure you're using that prep time in order to gather that information. All right, that was our last debate theory video. If there are any more lessons for debate theory, they'll probably be done online during live sessions. But as far as videos go, this is the last one. And yeah, good luck to everyone.